So welcome to this session here at the International Journalism Festival. And I'm going to begin with a question. What would you do if overnight you had to flee your home in fear for your life? Well, there are 123 million people who can answer that question. 1 in every 67 people on the planet has been displaced from their homes, according to the UNHCR. And whether through climate insecurity, global insecurity, or a physical threat to their own well-being. And that number has doubled in a decade. And journalists make up an increasingly large proportion of that 123 million, thousands according to the UN's Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, Irene Khan. And I'll give you some other numbers. At least 124 journalists were killed last year, the largest number on record. Add to that a near record number of people in journalists behind bars, according to the CPJ's prison census, and more global conflicts underway today than at any time since the end of the Second World War, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross, who detail these things. Oh yes, and in every year that number of displaced people was rising, freedom went backwards, to the extent that today 80% of the planet's population do not live in a place that has the freedoms that we enjoy. Only 20% of the world is free. So is it any wonder that actually journalists, we are the canaries in the coal mine for democracy, and with democracy going backwards, an increasing number of journalists are having to flee for their own lives. But what do we then do when they seek emergency assistance? Where do they go? And how do they get there? Because at very short notice, they need to leave to actually ensure their own safety. Well, that's what we're going to explore over the next 50 minutes, and I'm delighted to have the best panel you could possibly have to discuss this issue. Sitting next to me is Jody Ginsberg, who's the Chief Executive of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Jody joined CPJ in 2022 after leading both Internews Europe and also Index on Censorship. And as a board member of CPJ, I could not be prouder that Jody's voice has been one of the loudest campaigning for our Palestinian colleagues over the last 18 months and ensuring that they get, their families get both accountability and justice. So thank you. At the end, Jan Yaginsu is a barrister in his day job. He's also the deputy chair of the high-level panel of legal experts of the Media Freedom Coalition. Try putting that on a business card. That's sort of that's quite something. Born in Turkey, he went to Harvard, Princeton, and Harvard Law, and he literally wrote the book on emergency visas for journalists. It was his document that was adopted by the Media Freedom Coalition and gave rise to this event today. And sitting next to me, Ivan Kolpakov is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the fantastic Russian language website Medusa, the largest remaining independent Russian news outlet published in both Russian and English, banned by the Kremlin, and you wear that as a badge of honor, and we wear it with you. For the last 9 years, Medusa has operated in exile, based in Riga, the capital of Latvia, one of the countries to adopt the emergency visas for journalists. And Medusa continues to reach its audience, defying those in the Kremlin who want it silenced. And I'm delighted to, behind me, to welcome Bilal Sawari from Toronto. Few know Afghanistan better than Bilal. He and I worked together for the best part of 2 decades, broadcasting for the BBC, TRT, CBC, and just about every other European public broadcaster by the end. But along with many others, he was forced to, or he chose to leave Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul in 2021, ending up in Canada, another of the countries that has introduced emergency visas for journalists. He was able to get a visa for Canada. Sadly, he wasn't able to get a visa for Italy, but he joins us from Toronto online. So that's your panel. Let me start with you, Ivan. Roll the clock back to when Medusa had to go into exile, and you all had to pack up and leave. Just give the audience an idea of what that was like, both professionally and personally, to have to say goodbye to your home.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm happy to participate in this very important panel. Medusa started in 2013, almost 11 actually years ago, and we started in exile from the very beginning. And back then, when we moved to Latvia from Russia, everyone in Russia was very skeptical. Medusa was the first large media organization that was started in exile, because we kind of felt that the development of things in Russia is quite obvious, and it's not going to be good for independent journalism. I would say that in 2014, starting a new media organization in Russian language was already a stupid idea. To start it in Russia would be even more than that. So we went to Latvia, and it started easy, actually, because it was our choice. We were not, forced to leave the country. Though we expected that it will happen at some point. And when in 2022 the full-scale invasion started, we had 30% of our employees based in Russia, and we had to evacuate them very quickly. And that was really tough. I wouldn't say that despite all the acknowledgement of the situation, the majority of them didn't want to leave the country, even though they worked for Medusa. I would say that they were more prepared than anyone else. And they also were more privileged than any independent journalist escaped the country at that time, because we were already based in Latvia. We were expecting for them. We were happy to accept them, to help them to, settle in, though it was not easy even for us. I think that the minority of them managed to get to Europe directly. Other people stayed in some other places. One guy, he had only one option, to go to Kyrgyzstan, and he spent almost 7 or 8 months there without documents, actually. But it's nothing in comparison with all the other media organizations that needed to suddenly escape the country in a few days without any support from the, without any organizational support from the outside. So I would say that we have very positive experience.
Sure. So while it began, in 2013, 2014, you were going on employment visas. Latterly, in 2022, they were going on humanitarian visas. Is that right?
Right. So again, this is another thing. We have calculated that it will happen at some point, that the bad things are coming. So the first people who escaped Russia, they had the normal working contracts. The situation completely changed in 2022. Now we live in the world of total uncertainty. Yes, there are countries like Latvia. They provided support in 2022. There are countries like Germany that helped in 2023. Now there is no political will. We can't see a lot of political will in Europe to support journalists in exile,
right,
particularly Russian journalists. But there are a lot of other journalists in exile at the moment. Like every year, we see the new wave of exile journalism. I would never imagine that the media in exile will be such a big phenomena in 2025, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Bilal, Canada is another of the countries that has brought in emergency visas for journalists. Take us back to August 2021, and that queue at Kabul airport, waiting to get on the flight to go to Doha, and then to go to Canada.
Thank you for having me, John. It's great to be among yourself and great colleagues who are supporters of Afghan journalism and journalism around the world. Um, I think Canada was kind enough to evacuate the media family from Afghanistan, but as well as the larger civil society. And I believe uh, everyone would remember the chaotic scenes, not only at the Kabul International Airport, but around the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. So we were kind of lucky enough with the support of colleagues yourself. I don't want to embarrass you too much here, but phone calls in the middle of the night to literally speak to everyone to help evacuate myself and my family and my colleagues. And obviously, uh, the fact that we were forced to leave Afghanistan because we didn't feel that there was space for us to work, with the stifling of the voices that we witnessed today under the Taliban, the restrictions. It also means that we have not given up on Afghanistan. Just because we're not in Afghanistan, we have not stopped our coverage of Afghanistan. But the ideal situation for any journalist would be to be in his or her home country, to be able to give a voice to the people, especially at a time when the Taliban have turned Afghanistan into an open prison for the Afghan women, for girls. Being a father to two daughters, I would simply not want that for my daughters to not have a future in Afghanistan. And the country is going through excruciating levels of poverty, high unemployment. The poppy crop again is going to be a record, bumper crop of which the Taliban are part. And I'm so sorry to give you another heartbreaking detail as we're speaking. The Taliban are preparing to execute an individual in the western province of Nimroz at a stadium as we're speaking. And that's in Afghanistan, unfortunately, where 40 plus million Afghans have to live and endure this regime that is brutal, and it's cracking down against the Afghan people.
Jody, let me bring you in here. The point that Bilal makes about the importance of journalists continuing their work in exile. Just talk about that and why it's in our national security interest for actually people like Bilal or Medusa to continue reporting even though they can't report from within the country.
Well, I think we need to be clear. Is this working? No. Okay, I'm swapping. Oh, that's better. I think we need to be clear about a few things. The first is this, unfortunately, is the new normal. Journalism in exile is here to stay, and it is growing. Emergency relocation assistance is the most common assistance request that we receive at CPJ and has been for the past 4 years. The amount of financial support we give to journalists related to exile has gone up 227% in 3 years, and we are by no means the only organization doing on this. So the reason it's important is because, unfortunately, this is, in many cases, something that's going to be long-term. Nobody wants to leave their country. Bilal wants to be able to report on Afghanistan, preferably from Afghanistan, but if he can't, from Canada. Ivan wants to be able to report on Russia, preferably from Russia, but if not, from somewhere else. And so, in order to be able to do that, we need to have support mechanisms that allow people very rapidly to do this. Because one of the things that is clear is, in the trauma of moving, it's very difficult to sustain people in the role of a journalist. So you have to act very quickly, which is why emergency visas, which we'll come to talk about in a second, are so important, because you've got to act quickly to keep them going. But the reason it's important from a security perspective, if you like, is because without those people, who do you have to report on what's happening in those countries? Russian journalism, independent Russian journalism, has all been but snuffed out inside Russia. So the people that we are reliant on for information about what's going on inside Russia independently are exile journalists. The journalists that we rely on for information about what's happening in Iran are Iranian journalists in exile. And so it's really important that those people are kept safe so that they can report, so that we understand what they're doing. But the other thing I think is really important to think about is, if you are a country that purports to believe in media freedom and democracy, and you are not providing safe spaces for exiled journalists to operate, you are simply feeding the narrative of other countries. So we know that, to take the example of Iran, that every time a journalist goes into exile and then has to do something else, become a taxi driver, become a waiter, become anything else, that's used back in the country to sort of say, well, look at these people, they're not really journalists, they're not important. It becomes a narrative to disparage the West, democracies, but it also continues to undermine the role of the journalist and independent media within the countries themselves.
Jan, let me bring you in here. Back in 2020, when you wrote your report, could you have imagined that things would get so bad? And could you have imagined that the logic that you spelled out would not have been adopted by people who claim to be logical?
John, thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think Jodie and I often, when we see each other, talk about the need to be a few steps ahead. And when this Media Freedom Coalition of States was established in 2019, so pre-COVID, we, as its high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom, independent lawyers, unfortunately, but independent lawyers who are there to really provide advice to these states who purport to be advancing democracy both at home and abroad, and in particular protecting and promoting media freedom. We identified this as an area of practical weakness, by which I mean, we identified that as a matter of law, there were lots of different pathways available to human rights defenders and journalists at risk. But the practical impediment was twofold. The first was that these pathways were too slow, hence emergency visa for journalists at risk. And secondly, they were overburdened. And no one was thinking about what happens once you are in exile either. But at that point, the challenge for us was to persuade even democracies, and this is democracies in 2019. I'm afraid we've gone backwards in the 6 years since then, but to persuade democracies and members of the Media Freedom Coalition to actually put in place an instrument that would provide direct recourse for individuals faced with imminent risk. Did we foresee that there was going to be this much demand? Of course, we did not. But I should also say, just on a slightly more optimistic note, because optimism is conspicuous by its absence, I'm afraid, at the moment in our discussions. But we as a panel, and I certainly as the main high-level panel author, were told that what we were embarking on was hopeless. We were told that we had absolutely no chance of persuading any of these states in 2019 to establish a new mechanism, an emergency visa for journalists at risk. And we were told that by a great many parties, including parties who also wanted this visa, and it was slow work, and we consulted very, very widely. CPJ were extremely supportive, the UN Special Rapporteur was extremely supportive, but once that report was in place, of course, what usually happens with those sorts of reports, they just gather dust on shelves, I'm afraid. And I must hark back to Lord Neuberger's words, the chair of the high-level panel, the inaugural chair. When he brought us all together in 2019, he said, we are all eminent lawyers and jurists known for, our principle, but we operate in words. And what we're going to be judged by here is the impact of our work. So, John, I think what I would say is, once you can write a report, you can make recommendations, you can talk about something that didn't exist then, an emergency visa, but then you obviously have to persuade, and states are absolutely critical.
You share with journalists
Yes.
the importance of language
Yes.
and words. And on this issue of migration, words really matter. And too often the words are flood,
Yes.
or the demonization of those who have to try and start a new life somewhere else.
Yeah.
The numbers we're talking about who would need emergency visas from any one state in any 1 year are not immense, are they? This is not an invasion of these are not flotillas of small boats that are going to be landing on the British coast.
No, I'd make 2 points. So you're absolutely spot on. I mean, one of the great geniuses behind all of this was the inaugural deputy chair, Amal Clooney, when we were trying to work out how we can do things differently. And she came up with a challenge to states. And she said, floodgates, I understand, but we just want 50 visas, emergency visas per state. Because when you then do the maths, that's a pretty serious capacity. But the second point, actually, the point that is made by states privately about why they can't do this is asylum, right? Oh, is this going to lead to lots of asylum claims? And we can't, we just can't. We don't have the resources. Let's use Ireland as an example. You look at the numbers for Ireland on the Human Rights Defender Scheme, and we as the panel, I should say, we were empaneled to advise states about media freedom, but all of the mechanisms that we have advised states to put in place, we have advised to be available for human rights defenders, and we've counted journalists as human rights defenders so as to be able to have as broad a scope as possible. But the asylum argument, back to Ireland, 2011 to I think 2024, 800 or so, or 860 or so visas, 6 applications for asylum. Less than 1%. So it's very easy for states to say asylum, but actually when you look at the position that a journalist is in, they just need to get to a safe country as soon as possible. They then need to have the space in that safe country to decide where they want to be. It may not be that first safe country, and where they will be best placed to continue their vocation, but also to bring their own family to safety. And that's always missed out. Everyone thinks of it in terms of one final jump. It isn't. They just need to get out. They need to get out within days, not weeks and months. And one thing I would say is that, a visa is not a right, which is why it is a privilege, and which is why it's so important that these organizations, these coalitions, like the Media Freedom Coalition of States, actually step up, because it's in their gift and it's a value choice for them.
Jody, we've talked about the 80% of the world that isn't free, and you've talked about the responsibility that the 20% have. To draw on Jan's sort of hope for a second, we have seen a number of countries come forward in the last 6 years as advocates of this scheme, and people have benefited as a result. But right now, Canada, about to go to the polls. Germany has been to the polls. All of these countries who have been in the vanguard of this program, local politics is kind of risking getting in the way.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a couple of things. One is, where we have seen visa schemes, quite often they're in response to a particular crisis. So, a country might develop visa schemes specifically for Ukrainians or Russians, or for Afghans. And one of the challenges is that often then misses those places where something deteriorates rapidly, or when a particular journalist from a particular country, let's say Cameroon, really needs to get out, but there isn't a crisis generally in the country. So that's why the report calls for, and we have advocated for, some kind of standing mechanism that recognizes journalists as part of the kind of human rights defense who need special kinds of assistance because they're often targeted very rapidly and they need to get out very rapidly. The systems, as you will probably know, if any of you had to get a visa to come here, and as Bilal failed to get a visa to come here, they're slow, they are bureaucratic, they are expensive, and these mechanisms that we need to be much more like standing mechanisms to do it. So yes, the changes potentially that we're seeing in Canada and Germany could threaten those, but I think we need to do a better job of taking away from a partisan question. So you mentioned, words like flood, invasion. This isn't about being soft on migration. It's about recognizing that the media is a key defense for democracy. The first thing, you all know, because you're at a journalism festival, the first thing that gets attacked when democracy declines is the media. It is the number one, it's the go-to mechanism of autocrats everywhere for controlling the wider population. And so I think we need to, those of us who really advocate for this, whether or not there's going to be a change of government in Canada or elsewhere, really need to be stressing that this is not a partisan issue. It's an issue about shoring up democracy, which again has become a little bit of a dirty word recently, but also everybody's freedoms. And it's not special pleading for journalists as a special entity or a special group because we're so marvelous, although obviously we're marvelous, but it's because we play this really, really critical role in shoring up the broader system of democracy, rights, and freedoms.
Ivan, is there a sense in which the system hasn't really kept up with changes in technology? So, there was a time where all reporting was eyewitness, and if you weren't there, you couldn't tell the story. Today, that simply isn't the case. That you can report a story in Russia or a story in Afghanistan, not in Afghanistan, and the system hasn't really kept up with that.
Well, you can and you can't. Like, it's not true. It's just simply not true. Reporter has to witness stuff. Of course, normally a reporter sees something right after the event. Like this is what normally happens in the field. But you are losing your feeling of reality if you are not there. So I can talk about our newsroom and our experience, and so we escaped the country completely in 2022. So officially we don't have any stuff in Russia anymore. Though before 2022, some of our reporters even had accreditations in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so that made them the foreign correspondents in their own country. It's weird, but still. It was possible to operate on the ground officially. They could use their documents, they could officially interview people on the ground. Now Medusa is completely outlawed in Russia. It means that you can't interact with Medusa anyhow. If you provide comments, you could be fined or imprisoned. If you writing for Medusa, you could be fined or imprisoned. If you post a link on Medusa, you could be fined or imprisoned, etc., etc., etc. So this is extremely dangerous to work for Medusa, but still we have people on the ground. There are reporters on the ground. And we call them proxy reporters. There are completely new protocols for them. You need to reinvent, when you do something like that, you need to reinvent the whole profession from the scratch. No one knows how to operate in these circumstances. So we have very, inventive new protocols for these reporters. No one is doing the whole story, for example, on one's own. It's just impossible. And this case is a good example of the problems of media in exile are very diverse. And like, yes, you have people who are trying to get in some safe place, but you also have people on the ground, and they potentially need help. They don't have visas. They don't have support. You can't explain it to anyone in Europe. Like, you have a person that stays in Russia and keeps doing journalism, and this person needs a visa as a back option, right? And there is no government. There is no government in Europe that understands that currently. There is no flexibility at all. There are no places where you can go and you can discuss that. It's too complicated. Like, why is this person in Russia if this person is against Putin or against the war? It's hard to explain. You know, this is a person who is staying in the country to be your eyes, basically, to be our senses in this country, to witness stuff. We can report, we can stay relevant, for our readers in the country, we can stay relevant for you, for the world, we can still witness things. And these people also need support. So like, but say, to put it very simple, there are always two layers. The first layer is humanitarian, and the second layer is institutional, and both are important. If you don't provide humanitarian support to these people, you are losing them. You're just losing the precious resources. The precious part, like it's irreversible. If you are not thinking about the institutional support and you only focus on the humanitarian part, you're losing the key part of democracy. You're losing the independent media industry as an institute, and it's very dangerous. It is extremely dangerous. Okay, we have now the situation of 2025, and there are many industries, media industries in the world that dramatically collapsing at the moment. It will never be replaced. It will never be replaced. If we lose these people, they will start working as taxi drivers or anyone else. They will go to McDonald's. They will never return to journalism. This is irreversible.
Can I just bring Bilal in? Because nobody ever said that journalism was logical or made sense, and we do it because we believe in it. And the same is true in Afghanistan, Bilal. I think we just lost Bilal. So you do get your chance to come in, Jody.
Oh.
That's.
I censored Bilal. I feel bad now. But I wanted to pick up on the point that Ivan made. It makes economic sense, right? So you think about how much money many countries have poured into media development, as they did in Afghanistan and elsewhere. And at the point where you have made that investment, it is utterly short-sighted and frankly, a bit like shooting yourself in the foot, not to then carry on supporting those individuals in some way. And to do so through a visa scheme is one of the easiest ways to do it. It's actually a kind of logical extension of the support that you give in other ways through media development. And it's going to be really key now. So I was just in Brussels Monday, Tuesday, where the EU is desperately trying to think what to do now that the US has decided to basically kill Radio Free Europe and other things. Well, thinking about supporting exile media through a visa scheme is one really easy, logical way to do it that doesn't require you to recreate some new organization or build something new. You can support journalists who are doing that work in those countries, speaking back to their communities, and they can do it. They just need to put visa mechanisms in place so that they can get those people into their countries and able to report.
Bilal, I was going to ask you about the importance of community, because just as journalists don't do things because things are safe, they do it because they believe in it. Journalism is an odd profession in many ways because we are quite clannish. We like the company of other journalists. Even if we compete against them all day, we then go and share a drink with them at night. And for someone like you who's been forced to leave your own country, and you may not be able to work as a journalist in your new country, but being surrounded by other journalists keeps you within the profession and keeps you thinking as a journalist so that when circumstances change, I think he's gone again. But that's the point, Jodie, isn't it?
I'm the spokesperson for Bilal.
There is something, isn't there, about... Yeah. Sure, let me bring the mic to you so that everybody can hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, the question was about the importance of community, right?
Well, staying together so that even when you're out of the country, you're surrounded by fellow journalists who have been through the same experience.
Yes, exactly. So my name is Zahra Nader. I'm an Afghan journalist and editor-in-chief of Zan Times. It's a media that I created after the Taliban takeover in August 2022, 1 year after the Taliban left. And this is Zahra Joya. She is editor-in-chief of Rukhshana Media. She started in Afghanistan in 2020 and had to flee Afghanistan and re-establish as a media in exile in London. So what's happening with us is, as all of you are talking here, so first of all, our interaction was like, okay, how do we get our colleagues out of Afghanistan? And it was up to us. I feel there was not a loss of institution, there was not any preparation to help this journalist, but it was left up to the journalist individual trying to connect, trying to find their own ways to be able to help their own colleague in Afghanistan and get them out. And international journalists also played a huge role, including yourself and other people who were involved, the CPJ. But what's happening after that is I feel that there is a gap. So now it's totally different, but the gap started here of the donor deciding, okay, are we going to fund the media inside Afghanistan or the media in exile? And they started saying, we feel it's cheaper to fund the media in Afghanistan because the salary is less, but the journalists who are working in Canada, they cannot get paid the salary that you can pay them in Afghanistan. So the dollar, kind of a loss of dollar, lost in incentive of just trying to do it. And then there is this conversation of some media that still have footprint in Afghanistan. They are less likely to engage with us because they say, oh, but you are producing, your reporting is about making the Taliban accountable. You're talking about gender apartheid, about all the things that the Taliban are doing and the censorship of media and everything. So if we support you and stand by you, that means we lose our access to Afghanistan. So there is this all complexity that would make our work as a journalist media in exile impossible to continue and to do the work that we are doing. And I hope that this answered the question.
And look, thank you for your, not just for the point, but also for your important work. It's very grateful.
Yeah.
I was just going to say in response to that, it's absolutely spot on. But something that we must not lose sight of is that there is also a serious question as to whether or not journalists in country can even get to exile in today's world, right? So emergency visas for journalists at risk, right? And there is still an enormous need, but we live in a world where there is even less willing on the part of states to even provide, whether it's an ad hoc mechanism, whether it's a standing mechanism for this. So, of course, some journalists have been able to benefit from these mechanisms, and we've got statistics. But my greatest concern is that actually, what we have achieved is nowhere near enough, but also there is more demand, and there are going to be fewer visas. And therefore, we have to start again with some of these states. We have to start with the states because it is in their gift. And then we have to build up systems which support journalists once they're in exile, but we do need to get them into exile in the first place.
It would be bad enough if if democracy was flourishing. The reality is democracy is withering. And those few states that still practice democracy have sort of got a responsibility to spread the message and take action to make sure it literally doesn't wither on the vine.
It's absolutely right, which is why I go back to good news story, so far as you can call it good news story. I think Jodie has also seen, because we've been doing this together at least since 2022, it is literally a matter of, these are the mechanisms going to individual states, pincer movements, the NGOs, the legal experts, and saying, okay, these are the recommendations. We will work with you in relation to this individual country, and we will help you sell this. And for some, you talk about soft on migration, for some this can be sold as soft power, in fact, bringing the best journalists into these vibrant cities. But it has to start with individual states moving, and often that's a matter of finding an individual foreign minister who's going to say, well, okay, my country will be the first. And in relation to our report as the high-level panel, Canada did move first because the foreign minister and the prime minister really believed in it. Czechia moved first in Europe, and it was before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And you'll recall when we met, Jody, in Estonia and Tallinn, days before the invasion, and Czechia said, we're going to do this scheme. So it's really important to focus on individual states and individuals.
What we need is more foreign ministers who are journalists. That's the Canadian foreign minister was previously a journalist, so that sort of helped. Ivan, when you survey the landscape and you think about this issue, what gives you hope? You know, we talked about the importance of hope. What gives you hope?
I don't have a lot of hope, to be honest. And I think that like journalism is a belief that you need to re-establish every day. And right now we have a lot of concerns about journalism. People are the crisis of trust is at its biggest scale ever, like historically. And of course, it's really hard to find reasons to keep doing this job, that's all. And I think that every newsroom struggles on its own in this situation. It doesn't sound great. I can't comfort you, you know, because I don't feel comfortable now. And we used to say that we are survivors because we started in the circumstances when, as I already said, it was a stupid decision to start the new media organization, and we kept rolling in this horrible environment, and we are still here. But I mean, that was a rally. I don't know. It was a, how do you call it?
A roller coaster.
Roller coaster, right? And I think that there is a very popular expression in Russian, palliative advocacy. It means that the advocate, the attorney in Russia, can't help his or her client, in fact. But an attorney can help to avoid you violence. You're not going to be murdered. At least you're not going to be murdered right after you're going to be detained. This is what is called in human rights activism, a palliative advocacy. You can't basically do a lot, but you can do something. You can be near your client. And there is a mirroring expression about journalism. Like journalism, we can't do real journalism anymore. We are doing palliative journalism at the moment because you publish an investigation and nothing changes. No one's fired. Like, yes, it's true. When you publish something about Russia, no one's fired, nothing happens, probably. But does it actually work like that in other countries? Does it work like that in Western countries? Not very often, to be honest. But at the same time, in our case, in the circumstances of real authoritarian country, you can do something. Like you can say, it's dangerous, run, escape. Like this is really dangerous. This law is dangerous. This situation is dangerous. This place is dangerous. And this is what we can do. And I think it's really obvious that you can help people survive. This is like the most direct journalism you can even imagine. Probably it provides some belief, some strength from time to time. Not sure about hope, but yes, it helps you keep rolling.
Well, the fact that you're keeping independent journalism in the Russian language alive gives us hope. Bilal, we've not got long left. Hopefully it won't drop out when I ask a question again. What gives you hope as you look at Afghanistan and your own situation in Canada and the situation facing Afghan journalists around the world? Do you have any hope?
Absolutely. Afghanistan is not going to go anywhere. The country stays, plus 40 million people. I think what gives me hope is I see a generation of Afghans, especially the younger generation, a much more capable one, are paying back their dues to the country. They're fixing what was unfixed, if I can use that word, by our leadership, the miscalculations of our leaders, and also the way we were treated by our insincere allies in the West. I mean, we have to face the fact that Afghanistan is a country of 40 million people, and we have to be there for them to give them a voice. That's in our control. What is also very important, I think, for the wider world and the West in general is to continue to keep the Taliban accountable. Where is the issue of methamphetamine? Where is the opium trade? Where did the Taliban come into that? How are they turning entire generations into school of extremism? I want to say that it's becoming the Harvard of extremist groups, the foreign fighters and all these issues. And more importantly, to hold the Taliban accountable each time Western nations engage with them on counterterrorism and other issues, that how are they banning the Afghan women and girls from education and everyday life. And I think that gives me hope. But
Okay.
as I would agree with my colleague earlier on, it's not a lot of hope, but we cannot give up on the country. And I'm sorry for the technical.
Oh, don't be daft. That's fine.
Thank you.
Jan, I joked with Jodie at lunchtime that Perugia this year feels a bit like a mix between a wake and group therapy. What gives you hope as you look forward to where we're going to take this project next?
Well, I mean, what gives me hope is that we do have a mechanism in place. What also gives me hope is the fact that, I see, whether it's the clients that I have, I see Keelan Gallagher is in the room, Karen Kaiser is in the room, Maria Ressa is in the room. We are dealing with these issues on a daily basis. And the difference between having an emergency visa and not having an emergency visa can often be the difference between silence and a gateway to the continuation of expression. And yes, it is a very, very difficult time, but this is why we have to keep going, because silence is not something that we're willing to countenance.
I am going to ask you for hope, but I'm also going to ask you one. We went to see the shadow ministers 2 years ago to advocate for this, and in November, the British government signed a statement calling on states to issue emergency visas for journalists, a country that has singularly failed to issue emergency visas for journalists. Where do you find hope, Jodie, in this, and how do you not despair and give up every day?
I find hope because there are people like Ivan and Zara and Bilal and Maria, and every single day they get up despite the most incredible odds. Our colleagues who get up every day in Gaza, despite incredible odds, and do the work. And it is absolutely our duty to make it as easy as possible for them to do that work. And it is all of our responsibility as journalists, as lawyers, as people in media development, to get up every day and make it so that those people can do their work. And we are not, in terms of visas, there's lots of things we can talk about at this conference, but in terms of this, you are not asking for very much. And as people are desperately grappling with the shit show that is going on in geopolitics, this is a small thing that can make a really big difference. So if countries want to make impact, this is something they can do. It doesn't cost them much money, and it's fairly easy. So that could be a real win for us in a year when it's feeling like there are not very many wins.
Well, let me thank you for all your work. Jan, thank you for all your work on this issue. And Ivan and Bilal, thank you for keeping the flame of journalism alive in Russia and in Afghanistan. And thank you for joining us this afternoon.